Welcome back to Ancient Time Survival. If you are watching this for the first time, subscribe right now and drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from, because what we are about to cover today is exactly the kind of buried, inconvenient history that this channel exists to dig up. And before the algorithm buries this one too, hit that notification bell. Here is the question that started this entire investigation. How does a farming community that uses no electricity, no synthetic fertilizers, no GPS-guided machinery, and no university extension programs consistently grow tomato plants that produce upwards of 500 fruits in a single season? And how did the rest of the world not only fail to adopt that practice, but actively replace it with something inferior? That is not an accident, that is a story, and today we are going to tell it from the beginning, with real history, real agronomy, and real answers. Stay with this all the way through, because the practical section at the end of this script is going to show you exactly how to apply what the Amish knew in your own garden, on your own land, with seeds you can actually still get your hands on today. The Amish relationship with the land goes deeper than religion. Most people, when they hear the word Amish, think of horse-drawn buggies, plain clothing, and a rejection of modern technology. That is all true, but it misses the most important thing. The Amish are, at their core, a land-stewarding culture. Their entire theology is organized around the idea that the earth is on loan from God and must be returned in better condition than it was received. That is not a metaphor. That is a farming philosophy with 600 years of accumulated practical consequence. The Amish descended from Anabaptist communities that were expelled from Switzerland and Germany in the late 1600s and early 1700s. They were not wealthy landowners. They were refugees, and when they eventually settled in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, they arrived with almost nothing except an extraordinary memory of how to grow food in harsh, unforgiving conditions. They could not afford to experiment carelessly. Every seed they planted had to count, every harvest had to be preserved, and every variety they selected had to perform year after year after year. That context matters enormously when you start to understand why the tomato varieties they developed are so dramatically different from what ended up dominating the commercial seed market. What a 500-fruit tomato plant actually looks like and why it is not a myth. Let us be precise here, because precision matters. When agronomists and heritage seed preservationists talk about Amish heirloom tomato varieties producing 400 to 500 fruits per plant, they are referring specifically to indeterminate varieties, meaning plants that do not stop growing at a genetically fixed point, but instead continue to vine, flower and fruit continuously until the frost kills them. The most famous of these is the Amish Paste tomato, sometimes called the Amish Mark Twain, though naming conventions vary by region and community. There is also the Brandywine, which has Amish origins traced to at least 1885 in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And there are dozens of less documented varieties that never left specific Amish settlements, passed down through women in particular, who were the primary seed savers in most of these communities. A well-grown, indeterminate heirloom tomato on a long-season stake or cage system, given deep, biologically rich soil and consistent moisture, will absolutely produce north of 400 fruits under the right conditions. That is not marketing language. That is what happens when you grow a variety that has been selected over generations, specifically for maximum production in non-irrigated, non-chemically amended soil. The plant is doing exactly what its ancestors were bred to do. Contrast that with a modern hybrid variety like the Celebrity or the Big Boy, which are determinate or semi-determinate. They produce a large flush of fruit in a compressed window of time, ideal for commercial harvesting machinery, and then they are essentially done. If you are a commercial farmer trying to pick everything at once and truck it to a processing facility, that is exactly what you want. If you are a family trying to feed itself from June through October, it is a disaster. The seed companies did not stumble into this replacement. It was a deliberate market decision. Here is where this story gets uncomfortable, and it is important to say it plainly without conspiracy theory language, because the facts are plain enough on their own. The shift from open-pollinated heirloom varieties to F1 hybrids in the mid-20th century was a business decision driven by one very specific commercial advantage. Hybrid seeds cannot be saved. When you plant an F1 hybrid tomato and save the seed from its fruit, the offspring in the next generation do not breed true. You get all kinds of genetic variation, most of it unproductive. So if you want consistent results the following year, you have to buy new seed. Every single year. That is not a design flaw, that is the design. The green revolution of the 1940s and 1950s, backed by Rockefeller Foundation money and USDA policy, pushed hybrid varieties across the entire country. Extension agents went farm to farm. Land-grant universities restructured their curricula around hybrid agronomy. The economics were framed around yield per acre metrics that heavily favored uniform, machine, harvestable crops. What got dropped from the conversation was flavor, nutritional density, seed sovereignty, and generational agricultural memory. By the time the 1970s arrived, most American home gardeners had already lost access to the varieties their grandparents grew. The seed racks at hardware stores and garden centers carried hybrids almost exclusively. The heirlooms did not disappear entirely. They survived in places like Amish settlements, in immigrant communities, in the gardens of a few stubborn southern farmers, and eventually in the hands of organizations like the Seed Savers Exchange, founded in 1975 by Diane Otwheely and Kent Wheely, who recognized exactly what was being lost. The agronomic superiority of the Amish approach was not accidental. It was engineered through observation. One of the most important things to understand about how Amish farming communities developed their seed stock is that they were doing something that modern plant breeders do in controlled greenhouse settings, with data spreadsheets, except the Amish were doing it across generations, in real fields, under real conditions, with direct observational memory passed from parent to child. The methodology was different. The result was extraordinarily robust. Amish seed saving was not random. Within a community, the best plants, the ones that produced the longest, resisted blight most effectively, developed the deepest root systems, and produced the most flavorful fruit, were identified before harvest and reserved for seed. This is called mass selection, and it is one of the oldest and most effective forms of plant breeding known to agriculture. It is slow by modern standards, but the selections it produces are extraordinarily well adapted to the specific soil, climate, and pest pressures of a given region. That regional adaptation is something that a hybrid produced in a seed company greenhouse in California just cannot replicate for a grower in Ohio or Virginia. The Amish tomato varieties grown in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, have been selected generation after generation for performance in Lancaster County soil. That depth of local adaptation is almost impossible to reproduce with a commercially bred variety. It is one of the primary reasons heirloom tomatoes grown in their regions of origin taste so dramatically different from supermarket tomatoes, not just because of flavor compounds, but because the entire plant physiology is tuned to that specific place. The nutritional argument is not just anecdotal. The science has quietly confirmed it. For decades, anyone who argued that heirloom tomatoes were nutritionally superior to modern hybrids was dismissed as a romantic or a crank. But the data has changed that conversation significantly. A study from 1999 published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition and a broader analysis published in the British Food Journal in 2004 both found statistically significant declines in mineral content across a wide range of vegetables between the 1950s and the 1990s. The declines in iron, calcium, and vitamin C in tomatoes were among the largest measured. The mechanism is not mysterious. Modern hybrid varieties were selected for shelf life, uniform color, firmness at harvest, and high water content, all traits that maximize commercial value. Those selections came at a cost to nutrient density because the metabolic resources of the plant were redirected. High Brix heirloom varieties, Brix being a measurement of dissolved solids, including sugars and minerals, consistently outperform modern hybrids on nutrient density when grown in comparable soil conditions. The Amish, without ever running a Brix meter or reading a nutrition journal, had been selecting for high Brix plants for generations because high Brix fruit stores better, ferments better, preserves better, and tastes better. They were selecting for nutrition without knowing they were selecting for nutrition. The outcome was the same. How the knowledge stayed alive and where you can actually access it today. This is the part of the history that offers real hope, because unlike so many of the stories on this channel, this one does not end in total loss. The Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, currently maintains over 20,000 varieties of open-pollinated and heirloom seeds, including dozens with direct Amish provenance. The Sustainable Seed Company, Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and Southern Exposure Seed Exchange all carry Amish and Mennonite-origin varieties with documented lineages. And within Amish communities themselves, the practice of seed saving never stopped. There are also regional seed libraries, many of them operating through public libraries or community organizations, that carry locally adapted heirloom varieties you will not find in any catalogue. These are arguably the most valuable because they represent the most localized adaptation. If you are serious about this, contacting your county's agricultural extension office and asking specifically about regional seed library programs is worth your time. Some of the most extraordinary living seed collections in North America exist at the county level and are almost entirely unknown. Here is exactly how you apply this knowledge in a practical and immediate way. The history means nothing if you do not act on it. So here is a concrete starting framework for anyone who wants to grow the way the Amish grew, using the varieties they used and getting the results they got. First, source your seed from a reliable heirloom supplier and start with one of 3 varieties: Brandywine, Amish Paste, or German Johnson. These are the most widely available, the most thoroughly documented, and the most forgiving for first-time heirloom growers. Order from Baker Creek, Seed Savers Exchange, or Southern Exposure and read the provenance notes on the variety. That provenance tells you what climate and soil conditions the variety was selected in, which gives you critical information for management. Second, build the soil before you build the plant. The Amish did not use synthetic fertilizers, which means their tomatoes had to extract everything they needed from the existing biological activity in the soil. Replicate that by working in 4 to 6 inches of finished compost before transplanting and inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi at the time of planting. This is not optional for heirloom performance. It is the foundation. Without deep biological activity in the soil, an heirloom tomato cannot access the mineral reserves it needs to reach its production potential. Third, stake aggressively and prune for the indeterminate varieties. This is the single most neglected step by backyard growers. An Amish Paste tomato allowed to sprawl on the ground will produce a fraction of what it produces on a 6-foot stake with regular pruning of suckers. The energy that would go into sprawling lateral branches redirects to fruit production when the plant is properly managed vertically. Drive a stake within 2 inches of the main stem at transplanting and tie loosely with soft cloth strips every 8 to 10 inches as the plant grows. Fourth, save your seed from the best plant in your garden at the end of the season. This is the step that most people skip, and it is the most important one. Select the plant that produced the most fruit the latest into the season, with the deepest flavor and the fewest disease issues. From that plant, select the most fully ripe fruit, not the biggest, the most fully ripe, and ferment the seeds in water for 2 to 3 days to remove the germination-inhibiting gel coating. Rinse, dry on a ceramic plate for 2 weeks, and store in a sealed glass jar with a silica gel packet in a cool, dark location. Those seeds will be viable for 4 to 6 years and will be better adapted to your specific garden with each generation you grow them. Fifth, grow a trial comparison in your first season. Plant 2 or 3 heirloom varieties alongside one modern hybrid in identical soil conditions. Keep notes on first fruit date, total fruit count, flavor, disease resistance, and last harvest date. The data from your own garden, in your own climate, on your own soil, is more valuable than anything a seed catalogue can tell you. After one season, you will have direct observational evidence that mirrors exactly the methodology the Amish used to develop these varieties in the first place. What the Amish knew about food security that industrial agriculture forgot. There is a final dimension to this story that goes beyond agronomy, and it is worth sitting with. The Amish insistence on saving open-pollinated seed is not simply a religious tradition or a resistance to modernity. It is a survival strategy that has been validated by every major agricultural disruption of the 20th and 21st centuries. When disease or drought hits a monoculture of genetically identical hybrids, the entire crop fails at once. When it hits a community that grows 10 different varieties with different genetic backgrounds and different resistance profiles, some always survive. That genetic diversity is the deepest form of food security that exists. It is the reason the Irish potato famine was so catastrophic, not because blight was uniquely destructive, but because Irish farmers were growing essentially one variety of potato, the Irish lumper, which had no genetic resistance whatsoever. The lesson was not learned. Modern American agriculture, which grows most of its processing tomatoes from 2 or 3 hybrid varieties, is structurally vulnerable in the same way. The Amish understood, through hard experience over centuries, that diversity is not sentimentality. Diversity is insurance, and the seeds they preserved, the methods they maintained, and the knowledge they passed from generation to generation are not relics of a simpler time. They are a blueprint for resilience that industrial agriculture has not improved on, only obscured. Final thoughts and your call to action. This is the kind of knowledge that disappears if it is not actively transmitted. The seed companies did not replace the Amish tomato because it was inferior. They replaced it because it was inconvenient for a business model built on annual seed sales. The families who kept growing it knew what they had. The question now is whether the rest of us are going to recover that knowledge before the last generation of seed savers who hold it in living memory is gone. If this video added something real to your understanding of food history and agricultural survival, subscribe to Ancient Time Survival right now. Every subscription is a signal to the algorithm that this kind of content is worth surfacing, and it is the only way this channel can keep doing this work. Drop a comment below, tell me which heirloom variety you're going to grow this season, or tell me what you want to see covered next. Share this video with one person you know who gardens, farms, or thinks seriously about food security. The information in this video belongs in more hands than it currently is. Let's change that.